Should probably ask if you're good to be in this recording, but I'm so excited to have everyone here. I'm going to change my name so that you can see very clearly who I am. This is Jasmine Barnes. We're going to hop into this exciting time tonight. Thank you so much for signing up and making the time to show up to Healthy Work Relationships, Understanding Attachment with Dr. Kelley Munger. Dr. Munger is in the Zoom, you can see with me already. I'm really excited to spend the next hour and a half diving deep into this really important topic, especially in this season when a lot is happening, particularly in education, trying to find resources to support ourselves, each other, and the kiddos that are in our school and work environments, and having those healthy adult relationships to model what that looks like for young kids. So I'm really excited to have everybody here. I'll introduce myself. I am Jasmine. I use she, her pronouns, and I am based in the Chicago area. I've been at QLED for about 5 years now, and my work is really focused on community engagement. So thinking about how we can get some of this high quality PhD level content out there to the world for folks to absorb and retain powerful information that could be useful in their work environments and their personal lives related to QLED's values and mission. And so this is an exciting event because it's one of our first webinar style events. Just a little bit of a different tweak to allow more folks to attend if they're desiring or able, and also to ensure that we can record really, really clearly and not have too much pressure on folks to be, Zoom ready. You can just sit back and listen in, almost like a podcast, to get all this good knowledge. Feel free in the chat to just say who you are, where you're at, where you're coming from. And another thing that I'll speak to more about later is the question and answer space. So as we progress, we might be a little bit more active in that area as well. So QLED's mission, you all have probably read this or heard this many times, maybe from my own mouth, is to develop emotionally intelligent educators who create relationship-driven schools. And so again, as we mentioned, that's the heart of our work and also very resonant to this topic, but thinking about how we build those emotional competencies and support for the adults who work with young people so that their school environments, their ecosystems can transform and really be, supportive and nourishing spaces for young folks out there, especially in a time of so much trauma and stress. This happens in 3 ways. We sort of divide up our mission into action in 3 parts. So one is developing. That looks like providing research-backed training in the science and skills and self-awareness of relationships, whether that's through our paid programs, which some of you may have been to, or through other free opportunities like this to kind of develop those emotional competencies and literacy. Catalyzing. So this is, again, just facilitating intentional spaces that can look like these smaller, more intimate groups like empathy circles, other elements that we offer to sort of keep letting folks develop and grow in relationships with each other around this work and to practice doing it in their own environments. And then finally, amplifying. So speaking intentionally both as QLED, but also amplifying the voices of our alumni and other folks who are out there living and doing the work, making sure that y'all have the mic and that we are also amplifying the great work that we hear about you and about the changes that are happening in the classroom and in school environments nationwide. Community events. So this is the space that has my heart, but our community space is a new evolution really in response to the pandemic, thinking about how we can have more regular gatherings for education leaders to come together, to connect with each other, and to practice, right, in community, embodying these values and having a deeper identification with QLED's mission. And so each of these spaces are created, the topics are chosen largely with that in mind and with your influence, which I think relates to this next slide around DEI. So again, we have a deep commitment to the diversity of voices that we showcase in these spaces, as well as to the diversity that is represented in our community of educators, both alumni and folks from across the country who are just fans of the work that QLED does. But we use your feedback and we use your insight to really design and direct how we design these spaces, who speaks and the topics that feel the most resonant based on your needs and the current climate, the current moment. And so again, even throughout this, if you have additional thoughts, other feedback that you want to share, for our handles at the bottom, the @QLED Schools is how you can find us on Twitter and on Instagram. And we also just welcome any of those thoughts or feedback in the reflection survey that's going to go out at the end, and also just via email anytime. We want these spaces to be as meaningful and as resonant for you as is possible, so that you're leaving feeling full and feeling like you've received a positive and powerful experience. Put all these up. So today, this webinar will allow us to do 4 very important things. First, to identify colleagues and teams that are emotionally safe, available, and supportive. Learn how to apply energy and intention to developing secure relationships at work, and identify people or experiences that are not secure, how to set boundaries. And then finally, just gaining that self-compassion, the tools to process encounters that have been insecure in past relationships and in current working relationships. So I'll have an opportunity to kind of explore all of these elements over the next hour and a half. I believe the next one is just a little intro on Kelley. Let's see here. It is. So Dr. Kelley Munger holds an MA in counseling psychology from Covenant Seminary and a PhD in early intervention and special education from the University of Oregon. Kelley is a researcher and licensed therapist working in the areas of trauma, adult attachment, special education, and human development. She is passionate about leveraging the power of relationships to promote developmental flourishing across the lifespan. So that is the wonderful Dr. Munger. She's my colleague. I'm very, very proud to call her my friend and my colleague. Her email is there as well if you have other questions or thoughts for her following the presentation. And if you have any questions that pop up for you that you want answered, use the Q&A space. I will try my best to respond if I happen to have that knowledge somewhere in my back pocket, just from knowing her so well and learning at her feet. But if I do not, we will have a short little Q&A time where she'll ask me those questions or I'll ask her those questions. You'll be able to hear verbally Kelley's responses and thoughts. And so without further ado, I'm going to stop sharing my screen. I'm going to pin my lovely colleague, and I'm going to let her take the reins.
All right. Don't think I'm pinned yet.
You're in. You're the host and you're pinned. It's all you.
I'm in. All right. All right. This is great. I am so excited to be sharing with you all. And like Jasmine said, I do work at Fuel Ed. Jasmine and I are friends and colleagues, and we learn a lot from each other. And actually, just coming in tonight, I want to begin with vulnerability. I had a hard day at work today. And so there's a little bit of even imposter syndrome of who am I to talk about healthy work relationships. And yet I'm also holding an understanding that actually healthy relationships are not perfect relationships. And what we are talking about tonight, attachment, is so complex. It's so hard. And really the work of secure attachment takes a long time and a really, really deep commitment. And so I may be coming in having a hard day at work, but I'm also coming in with a deep commitment to secure attachment and to really more and more people in the world experiencing the ease and the safety that comes with secure attachment. So without further ado, whenever I talk about attachment, I always start by showing my participants the Attachment Handbook. And the reason I do this is a summary of the attachment research of the last 60 years. And I like to show this to help us remember that this topic is deep and rich and complex. And so when we spend an hour together talking about attachment, it can be sometimes even a little tough or a little activating because this is so important. It matters to all of us. Our relationships matter, and you wouldn't be here if you didn't feel that way. And so we can't get into all the complexity tonight, but I think sometimes it helps just to acknowledge that I'm going to be trying to condense a lot into an hour and kind of create a framework around attachment that I hope is actually just helpful to you. And even consoling or soothing or energizing, actually. And so we will just hop right in. I'm actually going to start a timer for myself because, as Jasmine knows, I could actually talk about this topic for literally, days. So it is near and dear to my heart. And so just an overview. Okay, what is attachment, right? Attachment is a relationship pattern. It's how we relate to one another. And this relationship pattern is typically developed early in life in order to maximize the caregiver's closeness, right? And why would we want to do that? Of course, if you can imagine in early human history, you're running through the jungle, a tiger's chasing you, and you're an infant who can't even walk yet. You want to stay as close as possible to your caregivers in order to stay safe and to survive. At the same time, in order to grow and develop, You can't just be held all day. You need to explore, right? And get out in your environment. And so attachment is this beautiful relational dance where an infant explores just how far they can get from their caregiver, but still going back to check in and make sure that they're safe. And so in that way, it's like a circle. And in secure attachment, this occurs when essentially an infant's bids or invitations for soothing and safety, such as crying or reaching, that is actually responded to in a good enough manner, in an attuned way, not perfect, but most of the time when the infant cries, caregiver responds, picks the infant up, and the infant learns, oh, relationships are a source of safety. I can depend on other people to meet my needs. And that, of course, becomes embedded in brain development and patterns of, again and again, the expectation of care being met. So sounds great, right? But actually in the US, about 40 to 60% of Americans experience secure attachment. That number, it's such a wide range because if you can imagine, it's actually really difficult to measure secure attachment in different studies. They tend to land somewhere in this range. And so it's just good to name that secure attachment is not something that we all automatically experience early on, right? Sometimes, and we'll get into the reasons for that in a second here. So that is the very, very broad overview. But what's really amazing is that in all this research, which a lot of this was done first in the 60s and then on beyond that really since then, there have been patterns of attachment that have emerged in the research again and again and again. And these are now commonly referred to attachment styles. Now, before any of you get upset, if you've read certain book, there's a book called How We Love that talks about 5 attachment styles, and there are certain researchers that talk about 16 attachment styles. But today we're going to use the 4 attachment style paradigm. And the 4 attachment styles are dismissing, and these are the adult labels. Okay, so actually I'm going to reverse that. I'm going to start with the child labels. So 4 attachment styles in childhood. We have avoidant, secure, disorganized, and ambivalent or anxious. And so because attachment styles are generally, not always, carried across the lifespan from childhood to adulthood and even passed on generationally. The reason for that is that, of course, we parent in the way that we are parented oftentimes. And so without any sort of disruption in that parenting style, it is often transmitted. But when we move into adulthood, the names of the attachment styles change, which is not very convenient. So generally an avoidant experience in childhood would be called dismissing in adulthood. Secure actually is called secure across the lifespan. An ambivalent or anxious attachment style is called entangled in adulthood. And then a disorganized attachment style is called unresolved. And so we're going to get into what each of these attachment styles are like, or what the experience is like. But I want to caution you in sort of defining yourself in one of these boxes. I think I'll share a little bit about my story in a little bit here. I do think it can be helpful to say like, oh yeah, I really resonate with avoidant attachment. That feels like my experience. And yet I want us all to leave room for the idea of a spectrum here, of mess, of really in different relationships, we might even have different experiences, right? So some people will say, oh, I go into an avoidant mode with my mom, but with my dad, I feel secure. And that is perfectly fine. We don't need to fit neatly into these boxes, and we don't have to get into the strict scientific definitions. What I want you to do is to take what's useful here. Take what helps you grow, and what helps you grow in self-awareness and in awareness of your needs. All right, so the most important slide of the night, if you don't pay attention, or if you end up going to watch, I don't know, American Idol or something, do people still watch that? Then just wait, do this slide first, and then you can go. So this is the attachment cycle. And this is such a powerful visual in my mind because it explains how we develop our pattern of relating. And so just like I said earlier, the way that this goes is that we start at the top with a need, right? If we think of an infant, we think of a crying baby who is hungry, let's say. And so in order to get that need met, there becomes a cry of distress, which with most babies is an actual audible cry. And then a caregiver comes, meets the need, holds the baby, pats the baby, feeds the baby, burps the baby. And the baby then moves back to calm. And so if you can imagine early on, infants go through this circle or this dance hundreds of times a day, really, right? There are constant needs and really no ability to meet their own needs. And so this is called the attachment cycle. And when we can move freely through the attachment cycle, again and again and again and again, most of the time in a good enough but not perfect manner, then we develop an internal sense that our needs are met, that we are safe, we are seen, we are soothed. And this gives us a lot of freedom for growing and developing and exploring. So in secure attachment, right, we move through this. And like I said, that allows us to really balance out secure behavior with secure based behavior, which is the idea of going back to make sure you're safe. You know, if you've ever watched a toddler learning to walk, they'll take a few steps and then they'll turn back and look at their caregiver. And they're really just checking in to say, like, is this safe? Cool. And so that secure based behavior allows them to explore. And it allows you to rely on others, right? And to really eventually to move from distress to calm on your own. And this is kind of like when maybe misconception in the world of education at times, I think less and less so, would be that or it's not really misconception, it's something we forget, which is that self-regulation comes after co-regulation, right? And so if you don't have a secure base, it becomes very difficult to regulate yourself. And over time, getting to move through the cycle of your needs being met and you moving to calm creates this sense of self, what's called an inner working model that's healthy and says, I can rely on others. Relationships are actually a source of care for me. I'm free to explore. And even eventually I can regulate myself, right? It's almost like when we experience the move from distress to calm enough, it becomes an automatic pattern in our bodies, and something that in life looks like self-regulation, which is something that, of course, we value for our students, but also for ourselves, right? It's really hard to struggle with self-regulation. It takes a lot of energy and a lot of emotion. Okay, so attachment style number 2, my personal favorite because it's my attachment style, the avoidant dismissing attachment. And this is an attachment style where perhaps a caregiver is either too stressed or perhaps uncomfortable with emotions, uncomfortable with helping to process needs or emotions, or really valuing of independence and autonomy. And so in the case of avoidant, which becomes dismissing attachment, needs often go unmet, especially emotional needs, right? So it's sort of an interesting attachment style because often a lot of the physical needs might be met, such as food and clothing and water. It's more the emotional distress that is hard for the caregiver to deal with. And so there's more shutting down, dismissing of emotions, or general emotional unavailability to meet emotional needs. And so if you think about it, because all infants and toddlers and preschoolers would like to keep their caregivers nearby for safety, basically we adapt in early childhood to keep whatever behavior will keep our caregiver nearby. And so if crying and fussing and needing something pushes a caregiver away or frustrates a caregiver, then it actually makes a lot of sense to internalize your needs, to shut them down, and to become what's called overregulated. And overregulated really means that it's when you really can't move toward your distress, that you always kind of appear cool as a cucumber, and kind of have it together. And all of the needs and distress are internalized and may actually show up as bodily symptoms or sensations in your body. But overregulated becomes a pattern, and it's very adaptive in certain contexts. So over time, not receiving the soothing that you need will create that inner working model or that sense of self that's really biased toward independence and self-sufficiency, which of course, I think in our culture is really reinforced. There's actually a really interesting study where basically a researcher just described certain children and did a survey to find out what parents preferred in a child. And the most popular kind of child was the avoidant child, which is really not funny, but it's interesting, right? Because in a way, avoidant can translate to easy. And so if you experience avoidant attachment, which I have had experience with myself, you learn I can rely on myself. Relationships aren't necessarily dependable sources of care, and that over-regulating is really the best strategy of getting through life, and in getting my needs met, and really early on of keeping my caregiver close. And then we have anxious or entangled attachment, also known as ambivalent. It has a lot of special names, but basically in anxious and entangled attachment, the needs are met inconsistently. And so this might be, let's say a parent who has highly stressful job even, right? And so some nights they're able to be really, really available and attuned, and some nights they really need to check out and not deal with emotions. And what this is like for a young person is that inconsistency can create what is a powerful reinforcement. It's a intermittent reinforcement schedule for dysregulation, right? Because sometimes when you're fussing and crying, mom stays near. And sometimes mom or dad or caregiver doesn't stay near. And so that actually keeps the fussiness and the dysregulation going. It's like feeding the dysregulation. And over time, this experience, not receiving soothing in a consistent way, can create more of a bias toward helplessness or over-reliance on others, a lot of concern, right, about where others are. And when you work with young children who have this experience, they will often be hypervigilant, kind of being really aware, where is my caregiver? Where are they? Where are they? Where are they? But it is not secure-based behavior, it's actually anxious, right? Where is my caregiver? I don't know if they're going to be here. And so the messages there are along the lines of, I can't regulate myself, relationships aren't really reliable, and amplification is the best strategy for getting my needs met, right? So it's sort of the opposite strategy of avoidant attachment, where we kind of, if you have an avoidant experience, you're more likely to push that mute button and say, whatever, like, I don't feel this. I'm certainly not going to verbalize what I'm needing or feeling. Whereas in anxious or entangled attachment is more likely that you will amplify your needs out for others to hear. And in a child, this can look like more frequent dysregulation, which of course, it's important that I say that dysregulation is not always related to attachment. There are a lot of neurodevelopmental needs that kids bring to the picture that can also create dysregulation. So this is just one aspect of dysregulation. And then finally, disorganized or unresolved attachment. And so this is the least common attachment style in the US population. Some would say around 10 or 15% of Americans, maybe less, where this is an experience where a caregiver is a source of both comfort and alarm or terror. And so in this scenario, there is often some kind of trauma happening or some kind of abuse happening. and the child cannot really develop a coherent strategy for relationships, right? Because they're being exposed to fear-based behavior. And this acts like a mirror for the child, so that the child's sense of self is developed more around fear. I am not safe. I need relationships, but they are scary. And I have no real way to get my needs met. Amplification doesn't work. Overregulating doesn't work. And sort of the classic video of a toddler with this experience is that she would, when her caregiver would come in, she would turn her back to her caregiver, but she would also wave her hands to get the caregiver to come over at the same time. Not, because she is not old enough to really plan her behavior, right? It's automatically a pattern that she's living in. And so that is our fourth attachment style. So I will state the obvious, everybody. Our attachment styles, I don't know if you've noticed this, but they go to work with us. And actually, I love in the chat, if any of you all resonated with an attachment style, you can go ahead and throw it in. You don't have to, of course. But I know that for me, everyone at Fuel at Schools knows that I have an avoidant history. And that means that when I am really overwhelmed at work, or if I'm triggered by something or hurt by something, I'm not going to have a big reaction in the moment. I'm actually probably going to turn my screen off or leave. I'm going to avoid the emotional overwhelm. And so I'm working on that. We work on that together. But it's just really powerful to name this. Our attachment patterns go with us to work, and they go with us to our families. They go with us in life, and they do have a huge impact. And so also, I think that even we as a society, we actually like to put things in a good or bad category. And of course, I can see how secure attachment style would be seen as, like, of course, the positive attachment style, the best one, the one we have to have. But while that's probably true because it's the healthiest, safest experience, it's also important to note that our attachment styles do protect us from overwhelm. And so there's something where we can hold the tension of both wanting to build secure attachment and honoring and respecting the ways that our bodies have adapted to and coped with hard situations, or basically less than ideal environments. And so all that to say, we are not going to be unkind about insecure attachment tonight. We're going to actually acknowledge that those patterns protect us. Even as we lay those patterns down, they have served us at different times. And so on the one hand, right, I'm saying that attachment styles protect us, but, and this is why we're here, our pattern of relating, or our attachment style, may also keep us from experiencing the closeness and or the autonomy that we really long for as humans. And so that's why we care about this. We actually care to be able to be intimate in our relationships, and also to be able to set boundaries and be safe and autonomous. Okay, so how would this really look? Sorry, this is such a busy slide, but I really wanted to keep them all side by side. And these are just some ideas. This list could be so much longer, right? But I made a little list here. I will read through some of them, but I hope you can read from wherever you're at, and really just think about kind of what resonates with you, what stands out, what you see on here. They're like, oh yeah, I experienced that so much at work. So insecure attachment at work, there's more trust, right? It's easier to trust. And because of that, there's more free exploration, ideas, creativity. Like, I feel free to kind of to say my ideas out loud, or to listen to other people's ideas. There's more direct communication to say, I feel and I need. And then also that ability to just balance the respect for self with respect for others, right? I see you and I also need you to see me. And so that leads to more collaboration. And probably most importantly, in secure attachment, the ability or the intention to repair whenever ruptures and breaks occur. So for me, as more avoidantly attached, right? Like I can get to a point where I'm overregulated enough to almost convince myself that I don't care about repairing relationships. Like I'm out of here. And that's not healthy, right? An avoidant attachment, right? We're going to see overregulation is more comfortable in a workplace. And so it's more challenging to share openly. People might perceive you as holding your cards closely, as maybe hard to really know what you're thinking or feeling or needing. Certainly what you're needing. Sometimes in avoidant attachment, that's the hardest of all. We could share how we feel, but to share what we need is too vulnerable. May place a high value on clarity and structure, right? If I know what I'm supposed to be doing, I feel safe. And often from a place of avoidance, I will do it well so that no one can hurt me by criticizing me or getting too close. So closeness may feel uncomfortable, and this may result in the perception that you're closed off or unavailable. In entangled or ambivalent and anxious, it's a little bit the opposite, right? There is a discomfort with distance. It's more of a we energy, more likely to feel activated or reactive, right? And like we said, that amplifying of feelings and needs. Placing a high value on knowing that your relationships are okay. So there might be insecurity in relationships, worry that people don't like you, or a sense of not being worthy. And then becoming over-involved, right? So I think we think sometimes of secure attachment as just sort of like this blank check of love and closeness. But like I said earlier, that's not true, right? We balance secure base with exploratory. So we balance being close with being autonomous in secure attachment. And the avoidant is more like the person who is avoidant is more likely to be more self-reliant and autonomous. And the person with an entangled experience is more likely to be anxious and really involved with relationships. And so we really rely on others to feel safe. And so because of that, because there's a high value on if the relationship's okay, it might be difficult to set boundaries or to express these directly, right? So there might be amplification of emotion or reactivity, but the direct communication of boundaries and needs is harder. And then finally, if you have a history of a disorganized attachment, of course, there's struggle with trust, right? Because relationships have not been safe. They really haven't been. And so that, again, like that little girl who has her back turned and she's calling people over, that in an adult can look like confusing or unpredictable behavior. Like one day I think we're good friends and the next day I think she's mad at me is sort of the sensation. And so it may be hard for others to know where they stand. And a person with this experience may need more time, lots more time, and lots of reliable experiences in order to build trust and safety. Because really, this person may not actually feel worthy of the time and care that others can offer in relationship. And if you haven't been able to be co-regulated throughout your life, to have someone care for you and help you move back to calm, then just remembering that you haven't had practice with regulating yourself. And so there could be an experience of dysregulation that's really powerful and really difficult. And so with that, I'll kind of slow down for just a minute because I would love to hear if any of these attachment strategies or behaviors from the previous slide sound familiar to you. Either you observe it in yourself or in others. Don't throw anyone under the bus. But I'd love for some of you just to chat that out. And Jasmine, I'll go back to the slide Jasmine, I wonder if you recognize anything.
Oh, so many things, Kelly, so many things. So this is, yes, the heart of our work. I'm very familiar with all of these attachment styles. But it always just hits me and resonates really deeply. I definitely like default to avoidant. I would say that in my, family of origin, that's definitely what the coping, or like the way, the sort of hyper performance is how I showed up in that environment. But I also think it's interesting how we can very quickly toggle depending on the person that we're with and the relationship that's present. Even thinking about adults versus children, or yeah, just different dynamics, and how I can feel and see myself being entangled in certain dynamics, which is so funny because as an avoidant person, folks who are more entangled are so annoying to me. I'm like, set a boundary, like back up, doing too much. But then I can see myself doing the exact same thing with certain people because of whatever, either because we share identities, or because we're invested in a project together, or because I trust them so much. And sometimes that ability to be in that secure place where we're setting good boundaries and we're able to, like have self-reflection, aren't there. And it can look, I think what's interesting too, is sometimes that entanglement, or those moments of entanglement, can look or feel like real intimacy, or like real love, or real teamwork.
Yeah.
And this tool's been useful to think about, oh, maybe it's entangled. Or with avoidance, it can be like, well, I'm just doing my work. I'm just doing, getting the job done. And I'm like, actually, I'm being very avoidant here. I'm not really addressing what's coming up for me in terms of how much work's on my plate, or how challenging it is. So it's fascinating witnessing that in myself as someone who has been exposed to this for so long. And even with that awareness, right, it's always in our nature. We're kind of constantly trying to find that balance, or I am at least, between being in that entanglement and being in a state of avoidance.
Yeah. I hear that. It's almost like balancing on a seesaw a little bit of figuring out, that distance between me and you, and in the workplace that can get really tricky. I thought it was so interesting how you said that actually, even when you trust someone, when you feel close to someone, that can create entanglement if you have an avoidant history, because you're like, oh, I've been looking for this my whole life. Now don't go away.
Exactly. But then you go too far, right? Then suddenly
Yeah.
you're completely entangled. All your boundaries are being blurred. There's sides and teams, and there's like an intensity to it. And I think, again, our urges are all ones like for connection, right? Which is beautiful, but just, it's funny how certain dynamics or circumstances can bring out extremity in us. And so that's usually, if I feel an extremity in a relationship, I'm usually like, I need to come back to the middle. Like, something's going on. If I feel this intensely, there's something happening here that needs to be sort of leveled.
Wow. Yeah, absolutely. That reminds me of a quote from a psychiatrist named Kurt Thompson, who says that every infant is born looking for someone looking for them. And that's just a description, right, of the attachment journey, that we are all born looking for someone looking for us. And the way that we were looked for impacts how our relationships develop over a lifetime, both at home and at work. And of course, I should say that since a lot of us are educators, of course, we're talking about our relationships with peer educators, but of course, also students and students' families, that some of these sensations or experiences may come up for you, or you may observe them in students. And I would just encourage you not to, these boxes aren't so that we can, again, box each other up and be done. It's actually to build compassion, both self-compassion, right? Compassion for ourselves, like, oh, this is my story. This is my experience. And even I didn't choose this. I came into the world and this is how I developed. But also compassion for our colleagues and for our students and their families as they use their best relationship pattern to get through the day. And again, that is not to encourage you to, not set boundaries. Like Jasmine was saying, you will need boundaries with some of this behavior. And yet compassion for the story that each human brings into the classroom or the workplace or the conference room can really help you actually to regulate yourself, ironically enough. Great. Thanks, Jasmine. Can't wait to read that chat. And so kind of along with that, I thought you guys would like proof that I'm avoidant. Which attachment style do you resonate with? I took the experience in close relationship survey online, and that is one of the more validated instruments. And I came out, I'm right there on the line. You see, dismissing / secure. And I think that that's from a lot of work I've done in therapy and my relationships, which we'll get into in a second here. But it's just the tool, again, isn't to box us up, but rather to free us by being able to name our experiences. And so even if you're not wanting to identify with a particular style, that's fine too. All right, watching my time. I love it. So the question of the evening, so this is so depressing. If I'm born into this, then what? Well, good news. Can insecure attachment be healed? That is the question. And yes, it can. There's so much amazing research about the idea that secure attachment can be earned across the lifespan, and that, oh my goodness, it can even be, that security can be passed down to the next generation, right? So when we heal ourselves, we might be actually healing those who are coming back after us. And I would say that in the classroom, this is sort of the heart of Fuel Ed, this idea of a generational impact of secure attachment, that we know that when students don't have access to secure attachment at home, or even if they do, that having a secure educator can change their trajectory. That so often, if you ask adults, well, who was there for you? They'll say, oh, Mrs. Kinsler from first grade, or Mrs. Cunningham from fourth grade. Those are my actual teachers. And so the idea of secure attachment being earned across the lifespan is so powerful, because not only can you experience healing, but people that you serve as an attachment figure for can also experience that healing. So hooray for that. And so, well, okay, Dr. Kelley, Dr. K is what they call me at work. Why? How do you do this? I want it. Let's do it. So there are 5 conditions for building, or what's called in the science, earning secure attachment. I like the word building or constructing better. And this is feeling seen and known, feeling safe, which in your body often feels like a light and settled feeling, a strong feeling. Feeling comforted, feeling valued, and feeling supported for exploration. So it gets a little tricky, but if we think about, secure attachment early in life does have to occur in the context of a relationship. I would say that's true all the way across the lifespan as well. And so it's a little trickier, and we'll get into this when you're an adult, but in general, in order to develop secure attachment, we need secure attachment figures who can provide us with experiences of attunement, protection, soothing, delight, and encouragement. These are the experiences that help us to build those conditions for feeling safe and secure. And so how I'm going to try to break that down a little bit, how we would actually develop those experiences. Because really, as adults, because we're not completely dependent on 1 or 2 humans to meet our needs, we actually get to provide some of this for ourselves, and then we get to also receive this in relationship. And so the first way of earning security would be just the commitment to making sense of and reflecting on your own attachment story and needs. The second way, and we'll get into all of this more deeply, is a commitment to building subsequent secure relationships. So if you didn't have access to very many secure relationships, or if your primary relationships were insecure, then it's never too late to begin to build safe, secure relationships later in life. So our first piece, making sense of your story. And at Fuel Led, we take educators through this in our Whole Educator Collective. This process or journey of being able to make sense of your own story to really be reflective. There's a lot of interesting research about how essentially the difference between someone who has earned secure attachment and who has not is simply their ability to reflect, the capacity to really reflect. And this is called metacognition also, which a lot of you teachers probably already know this word. But metacognition involves awareness and regulation of our own inner experiences. So it's thinking about thinking, but it also extends to bodily sensations, emotions, and other bodily patterns, essentially. And so I just want to slow down for a second and just think about how amazing this is. That essentially part of how we construct a secure experience is being able to provide that parenting to ourselves by mirroring our own experience, by noticing it, validating it, and mirroring it. And not only are we reflecting on it, but also we're regulating that experience. So what I mean by that is that, oh, wow, I came in tonight like feeling pretty amped up, right? And really not feeling very secure. And so I had this little moment where I just closed my eyes, spoke to my body or myself to say, whoa, breathe, like breathe, you've got this. Which to me sounds like the voice of a compassionate parent, to allow me my emotion and also to move with me toward more calm. And so not only do I think about my internal experience, but I actually can change it and transform it. It's like melting a piece of ice inside of me, or turning something really tight into like a flowing river. And that is what often building secure attachment looks and feels like. A consistent practice of building that reflective capacity. And then adding to that, which is more of what we focus on at Fuel Led, really being able to reflect on the story of your attachment, right? So I'm not just, I often talk with, I don't know if I mentioned, I'm a therapist on the side here, but I often, where is my little sniggle? I often talk to clients, oh, here it is. This is my little glitter jar, but I often talk to clients about how when we are insecurely attached, we're inside the glitter jar. But when we begin to get outside the story and to look at it, to name it with a fierce honesty and compassion, then we can get outside the glitter jar. And it's like we're watching the story. We're not stuck in it. It's not defining the rest of our life. And so metacognition, telling our story to one another, or processing it yourself and journaling or with a therapist, is one way. And then related to that, these two strategies are not really that separate, would be building subsequent secure relationships. So it sounds really obvious, but I think it's important to name it, that identifying relationships and experiences, whether at work or outside of work, that are safe, available, and supportive, those are the relationships we really want to invest in and pour a lot of energy into, right? Relationships that are mutually generous, that have reciprocity, and where you know that this person is going to both respond to you and pursue you in the relationship, and also be able to give you empathy, but also is able to be vulnerable and share their own genuine experience with you, right? On the other hand, we have to identify people or experiences that disrupt the attachment cycle. If you remember the move from distress to calm, distress to calm, distress to calm. This might be an emotionally unavailable friend, right? So if you have a pattern in a friendship or a colleague where you do not feel that they can show up for you when you're needing support, or it could look like a relationship with a substance, right? Where I'm relying on a substance to take me from the distress to the calm, to take me through the attachment cycle. But unfortunately, it can't do that, right? A lot of substances have their place, but they are not attachment figures. And so we have to set boundaries around these people or these experiences to say, okay, I might be in this relationship because maybe it's a work relationship and I want to be respectful and I want to be professional. But also, this might not be a place where I bring some of my more vulnerable moments. And this may not be a place where I'm ready to share my needs or get my needs met. And I think that when you have those boundaries, it actually allows you to stay in compassion. I think is it Brene Brown, Jasmine, who says that basically like boundaries are the distance from which I can love you well. I don't know.
It's Prentice Temple. She said that.
Okay. Great. I love that so much. And so it's, again, secure attachment is not about being everyone's best friend. It's about balancing others' needs with your needs, balancing the dignity of others with your dignity, balancing secure base with autonomy. And so boundaries are just as important in secure attachment as vulnerability and openness are. Okay, so again, reconstructing the attachment cycle. I just want to kind of summarize this part that children, as we said, they really do need 1, 2, 3 primary adults to develop securely. But earning secure attachment in adulthood, I think it's more like a mosaic. You can imagine a beautiful mosaic window. And the mosaic is built out of relationships with ourselves, relationships with other humans. Oh, I wish I had my dog here, Floofy. Relationships with animals, with nature, spiritual sources, other things. Honestly, you can see my bookshelf here. I think I have secure attachment relationships with authors that I love. I feel seen by them. I feel safe. I feel soothed when I read certain books. And so there is this huge sort of almost like a repertoire, catalog of resources, of regulating resources that we can use to reconstruct that experience of moving from distress to calm, distress to calm. And this experience of when you feel that your needs are met and you're on the side of the attachment cycle that is green and labeled calm, that's called felt safety. I feel safe. I have felt safety. And you need to experience felt safety in order to develop secure attachment. And you need to do this by successfully moving through the attachment cycle on a daily basis. And so how are your needs met, right? Is it coffee with a colleague that you just really resonate with? Is it taking that break to, I went and ran at the golf course this morning and looked at pretty birds. It's very much something I would do. Jasmine probably read a really good book today to soothe herself. And so moving freely through this cycle day after day actually builds internal security and felt safety. And just like I said earlier, that if you practice regulating, it becomes automatic. It's the same concept here, that if you build and experience felt safety on a daily basis, it becomes more automatic in your body. It becomes essentially the baseline, which is amazing. So a few questions to reflect on. And I'm going to talk with Jasmine a little bit about this. Jasmine, curious, as we think about this, what and who are some of your sources of regulation? And how can you move through the attachment cycle on a daily basis?
Great questions. Well, first, I just love all of that. I love the second part of the presentation, the inspirational. Yes, we can get secure. It's possible. Healing is something that is available to all of us always, even in some of the most tumultuous, difficult, challenging relationships. And I'm sure some of you are experiencing those, unfortunately, in your school environments, right? With heightened stress, lack of trust, being overworked, being in a pandemic, that doesn't necessarily invite the healthiest and most secure versions of ourselves to those environments. But I just love the hopefulness of like, even in these conditions, we can always find our way back into that calm, right? That other side of the circle. So for me, I think it's interesting that you also mentioned how regulation and being in that cycle can come from things that are not necessarily living human beings, right? It can be books, it can be art, it can be a tree. And so for me, I think those sources are places that I usually go first because they are so secure. I know that walking in the sunshine and looking at the trees will always be a place where I can feel a sense of connectedness and regulation, or listening to music, right? Things that are not necessarily, I'm not worried if they're going to yell at me or that they're going to, react in a very extreme way. I know that they're going to be secure. That's usually how I like to embed my days, with little moments like that, whether that's right, reading a poem, listening to music, being out in nature. But then in terms of other people who kind of help me move through that cycle, it depends day to day. I think it really depends day to day. And I think in seasons as well, right? There are certain seasons where my mom, for example, is someone who I'm like, wow, I could just call her and she just grounds and regulates me. And there are other seasons where, I call her and that's not our dynamic. She needs things from me, or we're not seeing eye to eye. So usually I sense kind of like, what am I needing? And who might be someone who could show up for me in that way. So it could be a roommate or a good friend. But yeah, I just think that attunement and that willingness to let people play different roles in your life, for me, has been very freeing and has made me feel like I'm never lacking in resource, right? Even when my colleague that can't necessarily show me the kind of secure regulating energy that I need, I know that I have a friend who can do that for me outside of work. And so just being able to kind of pull from that pool of support, which again is a huge gift to have that. But I find that to be very nourishing and helpful.
Wow, I love that. And really, I hear like you're touching on the mosaic idea in a different way, that like
Yep.
you basically are saying you feel resourced, and
Mhm.
part of it is that having a variety of resources makes you feel safe.
Exactly.
Yeah, there is sort of a high stakes nature to early attachment, right? You've got this one or
Yep.
two givers and this one child, and it can be so hard. And I should have said this earlier. I know probably a lot of our attendees are caregivers themselves, and it can be overwhelming to even think about ways that you may have struggled to help your babies move through the attachment cycle. I certainly can completely relate to that, and just want to extend so much compassion for caregivers. Also for educators who are in classrooms with 24 or more. I don't even want to know how many y'all got in your classroom right now at a time, and how difficult it is to really be consistent sometimes, especially if we're dysregulated or don't feel resourced ourselves. And so I don't have a slide about this, but there is, a beautiful concept in the research called the good enough parent. And I think it can apply to educators. And the idea is that we should never feel the pressure to do this perfectly. That good enough is actually good enough, actually, for developing security. That if we're able to show up as best as we can most of the time, that will create conditions where students, children, whoever can thrive. And so I want to, if there's any pressure put on here, I want to take some of that off with just that little thought. Great. Okay. So we're almost to the end of this part, but at work, this could look and sound like providing empathy. When we think about helping our coworkers, we're not their mom. I'm not my coworker's mama. Thank goodness. But so thinking about what that might actually look like in action at work, one would just be offering empathy. And this is communicating to another your understanding of their experience, mirroring and validating that. I feel like we have a whole workshop about it, empathy school, because this really is a skill that you can practice and develop. The flip side of this is genuineness. And I think that actually in schools right now, there maybe is a lot of pressure to offer empathy, and not enough emphasis on genuineness, which is for educators to be able to express their feelings and needs directly. Because we know that the last 2 years have been so hard, and educators need the space to be able to name that experience and to ask for what they need. And then of course, if you want to show up as secure at work, consistent and reliable communication and behavior is a place where people can start to feel safe. And then, like I said earlier, attempting to repair when, not if, ruptures occur. And like I said earlier, I kind of want to run away from that or pretend like it doesn't matter. But that can be harmful to our relationships. And then related to genuineness, actually, when possible, setting the boundaries you need in order to meet the need for felt safety. That's kind of a weird sentence. But the idea is that, and I put when possible because I also want to acknowledge that in schools, especially right now, I think setting the boundaries you need can feel impossible. That the environment isn't conducive to boundary setting, that's not invited or welcomed usually. And yeah, I'm not going to leave it off the slide because it is something that you have a right to have your boundaries around what you are okay with and what you're not okay with. And then, so finally, we cannot control others' healing, right? Most of this whole little slideshow has been really focused on our own healing and going on that journey with others. But really by showing up in secure ways, the best you can, good enough, educator at work, we can offer others these small opportunities to experience safety and security with us. And so even though we can't always demand, control, or even expect secure responses or secure behavior from others, being able to offer that, right? And again, we're offering both empathy and genuineness, both love and boundaries. This is also a healing experience for you, right? Because for things to find secure attachment, I don't have a slide about this, but one is giving care, one is receiving care, one is practicing autonomy, and one is being able to negotiate your needs. And so by showing up in this work of secure attachment, you're really doing all four of those. And again, just to reiterate, you can't actually do this alone. Some of this is self-work and that reflective work, but also it is recognizing and building these secure relationships in your communities and getting work with a therapist or with a group or one of our amazing empathy circles or stewardship networks at Fuel Ed schools, or a workshop or something like that to help you go a little deeper here, to continue to explore your story as a human, as an educator. You're all worth that. And so, yeah, I'm going to end there with my questions or thoughts slide, but I think we're going to switch slides now, aren't we, Jess?
We are. You can unshare and make me the host again, if you don't mind. First, just thank you so much for your wisdom, insights, the calmness and joy with which you share your knowledge is so beautiful. I want to pause and just see for a real quick second if anyone has questions that they want to throw into the chat. I saw that there was one just about recording, and yes, this is being recorded and it will be shared on YouTube very soon. We'll be sending out an email to you probably early next week with the link so you can rewatch, gain more of that good, juicy knowledge and relive some moments of wisdom there. But are there any real-time questions that folks have for Dr. Munger? If not, I'll prompt with one or two of my own that popped up during her presentation, but I want to pause once again to see if anyone else has something they'd like me to ask. Anyone? Okay, well, I have a question, always a student, always happy to pick your brain. But at the beginning, you spoke a lot to this idea of an inner working model, which I think is really as a phrase actually that I'm less familiar with. I was curious if you could speak more to that, what that is, and how we navigate that through security, right? So often it sounds like the inner working model comes up with like avoidance, with sort of like our more extreme responses to whatever we received as children. But how do we make that inner working model healthier or find like the positive attributes of that model that we developed?
Yeah, good question. So I'll review what inner working model is. So it's almost like the template we develop for how we see ourselves.
Mhm.
And if you think about an infant and a caregiver, essentially, if the caregiver is an infant and every day the caregiver is like, oh, this is the lamb I use in therapy with children. And it's like, oh my goodness, look at you. Good morning, sunshine. You are so beautiful. Wow, look at you. The idea is that this little guy right here then has this idea of himself of like, I must be pretty awesome. Like, look at me, I'm amazing. Every time I see that person, they smile at me. And so there is this reflexive almost construction of the idea of yourself as being a mostly positive thing, that
Yeah.
you human are positive, that people want to be around you, you're worthy of relationship and connection, you're a delight. And so that would be a more, healthy inner working model. On the other hand, if you're always getting a distraction or a flat or even an angry or afraid posture toward yourself, you can develop an inner working model that's like, oh, like there's something wrong with me.
Hmm.
I actually don't seem worthy of relationship. I'm not inviting connection. And so, and of course, usually that's not a caregiver's intention to communicate that. It's like the hard thing, right? About life and being in this world where there's so much chaos and there's suffering and there's so many things that are out of our control that impact us and our ability to show up for one another. And so as an adult, I think the simplest answer to how do you change your inner working model, I think this is very simplistic, but I think it's about being in a relationship where you receive mirroring and delight in particular. So if those 5 conditions for constructing secure attachment, one of them was delight. And this is just someone enjoying you. Someone who wants to be with you, someone who wants to really, really connect with you. And so sort of across a lifespan, there's this experience of like, I really like being with you, Jasmine, to change that inner working model. And I think you have to have that as a repeated experience.
Yeah.
And probably with more than one person, like we've said, but I think even just identifying that you had that experience and that if you can make the connection between shame, your inner working model that's built around shame and your experiences growing up, and the power of that is kind of broken because you begin to see that like, oh, that was almost like it was like a miscoding.
Yeah.
That wasn't the right code for me. Like I was born lovable. I was born worthy.
Yes. Yes. So very, very powerful. I love that framework. And I think it's interesting just to kind of contextualize it within the theme of tonight with working relationships, how that inner working model can be affirmed through negatively, right? Through work experiences when we, again, are not being met with eye contact, are being dismissed, are not being seen, are being gaslit, or our ideas, our talents, our experiences aren't being delighted in or celebrated. And unfortunately, right, that's the experience for a lot of folks right now who are in the workplace, as well as something that people who are not in a secure place often, that's what is often all that's able to be offered, right? So we're kind of recreating some of those scenarios as adults. But I love the idea of finding folks who delight in you, and engaging in that delight, not with entanglement, but with security. And letting that delight really nourish and heal or repair some of the inner working model pieces that might be rooted in truths that aren't really truths, right? In lies that have been planted.
Exactly. And if I were an assistant principal or an administrator, I would say like the number one thing I would say is value and delight in your people, like point out their superpowers, point out their smiles and their the things that they bring.
Yes. So that's amazing. I think that's such a simple thing, but we forget it all the time, like the power of positive affirmation and truly like deeply rooted and honest compliments, especially around our work, which is where we, as a culture, put a lot of our energy, our hearts, our spirit. So I love that. And there's one more question we have in the chat, and then I'll close us out. But Dawn is asking, have you found it helpful for coworkers to identify their main attachment styles at work and share with each other, which is what we do at Fuel Ed, benefits and disadvantages?
Oh, that's a good one. Just for me and you, because we've lived this experience.
We have.
I mean, obviously at Fuel Ed, when you go through through our flagship training, Whole Educator Collective, you would do that. You would identify the attachment style you resonate with. And if you're there with coworkers, you would do that together. So obviously we do see some advantage and benefit. But having worked at Fuel Ed together for 3 years, well, Jasmine and I are in the Avoidant Club together. And I will say, from my perspective, and then I want to hear yours, I think it actually helps. It's helped me grow in both self-compassion and compassion for my coworkers. That when, let's say, one of our more anxious or entangled coworkers is really, really spun up about something, that I don't move to judgment. Or I don't always move to judgment. But I'm able to check myself and be like, oh yeah, like this is her moment. This feels hard for her. And can really like stay in empathy, even if I need boundaries. So I think that if it's done well in the context of really, I wouldn't just like send out a quiz to all the teachers and say, okay, tell each other your attachment style. I don't think that would be advantageous. No. But I think in the context of some deeper training and growing and reflecting together, it can help us to just really know each other.
I would agree. I would definitely agree. I think it's a very powerful framework to have, because it's also very much so rooted in your story. Again, like Kelley was saying, this is not like a survey result that you can then just like share, like, or even something, I think a personality test, like your top 5 strengths or like your Myers-Briggs, which are all fun and very useful tools. I think that something like attachment, because it is so rooted, particularly in our childhood traumas or our childhood narratives and experiences, is really very, very deep, very, very personal. But the ability to share that as a collective global framework is really nice. It's a good framework to step into collectively, and then to help have some language for how we navigate discomfort, issues, or conflict with sensitivity, right? Which can be really hard to do when you're like, this person is just my nightmare. They're just being really awful. I don't like them. Like, okay, but let's pause here. What framework are we coming from? What's happening here? And again, perspective taking, that's a lot of the empathy piece too. Like, if I was this kind of if I was anxious and someone refused to reply to my email about this project that I've been working on for 3 months, of course I might start to behave in ways that look like this. That makes a lot of sense. As an avoidant person, I wouldn't, but as an anxious person, I would. And so it just allows for that sense of, I think having that framework as a team allows you to step into empathy with a lot more ease, right? I feel a much more like direct path to empathy because I have that awareness of my colleagues in terms of their backgrounds and their attachment styles. So yeah, I would also encourage that. I think we have resources on our website. Kelley might even pull up like an article or something before the end of the night, or we might send out an email, but there's many an article, many a resource around what that looks like and cool ways you can bring that into the classroom. So, well, thank you so much, Dr. Munger, for your words of wisdom. A little applause to you. I'm going to screen share and close us out here. So we have a few more minutes to our evenings. Thank you all for being here. Feel free again, if other things come up, just to add them to the chat and we will either answer them now or make sure that we answer them at a later date. But first, before you do that or anything else, feedback. We really, 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 really value your feedback. I love this little QR situation. It works perfectly on your phone. You can just grab it and the link will take you right there. It's a short, I think, 4-question survey, just asking a little bit about how your experience has been, how we can keep supporting you, what you would like to see more of in this space. So just take a few seconds and fill that out. I'm going to talk about a couple other exciting opportunities to stay engaged with Fuel Ed over the coming weeks and months. So first, you see my little face there again. I'm very excited about this event that we are co-hosting with the Teaching Well. The Teaching Well is based in the Bay Area, and they do very, very similar. We call ourselves like sisters or cousins in terms of the type of work that we do, but they do a lot of healing and work with adult educators as well. And we're having a special space specifically for educators of color to come together to heal and to process. And so if you're interested in that, all registration can be done through our website. fielatschools.org/events. I would also encourage you, if you are a team leader, this can be a really beautiful and powerful space to have folks come, process, vent, talk about what's happening for them. I think kind of like we spoke to today, that sense of security and those people who can help resource you and regulate you are so essential to showing up at work in a way that is grounded and is open and is able to communicate and relate. So this is a great opportunity to kind of encourage and support your team, or for yourself as an educator of color to come and receive some of that resonance and some of that grounding experience in a very safe container. So inviting you all for that. And then also on our website at fielatschools.org/events, there's a ton of other opportunities to keep engaged, to learn more, to make more connections. We really want to offer as many free resources as possible, especially as the summer's coming up and folks are trying to reset and do some healing and recentering before the school year starts. We also are big believers in counseling, another amazing place where you can receive delight and affirmation. I was in counseling just yesterday. I left feeling very seen and affirmed and loved by my therapist. And so I would encourage you to go to our website as well, fielatschools.org/counseling. We have a list of different resources and counseling resources from a diversity of backgrounds, as well as some guidelines on what it looks like to have a more securely attached, attachment-based therapist, which is so important when you're looking for therapy that's really, really healing and transformative in ways that Kelley spoke to, and like in relationship to relationships. Mm. And then finally, if you are someone who is in purchasing power position at your school, we have some really, really cool programs that allow you to go deeper with some of our amazing trainers who have the ability to really, in nuanced ways, facilitate and dive deep into some of these contexts, some of these concepts through our curriculum. And so Whole Educator Collective, which is a multi-day situation, Empathy School, which is day long, and Trauma and Transitions, which is a smaller workshop. All three of them are great ways to just start getting some of these values enacted in your environments at school, at work, and helping your colleagues to kind of get some of what you just learned in this short introductory moment in a deeper and more immersive way. So just encouraging you to check out our programs page on our website as well, or to reach out directly to info@fielatschools.org if you're interested and really want to see this work on your campus. With all of that said, I'm flashing up one last time the feedback form because we love your feedback. It is the fuel that allows us to make our work meaningful and attuned. So just make sure you take some time to fill that out and let us know your thoughts. And if you have any other questions or needs, just email community@fielatschools.org, and myself or another colleague will respond and be attuned to your needs and thoughts. Otherwise, that is it for tonight. Dr. Munger, any final words from you?
I put a link to our Earn Secure Attachment blog because we do have a blog for every attachment style. And so that could be a cool thing for a group to go through together, kind of read one at a time and discuss. So I thought that'd be a cool reading club. And I just thank you all for your attention. I don't actually know if you paid attention, but I feel this webinar style is new for us. But I really, really genuinely appreciate just your presence, and Jasmine, you did such a great job being my partner here. So wishing you all journeys of earning secure attachment. It's never too late to both build that and offer that to others.
Yes. Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for taking the time and giving us all that free wisdom and knowledge. So powerful. This will be on YouTube very soon. It'll be getting an email likely at the beginning of next week, maybe even as soon as tomorrow, depending on how quickly we can turn around this delicious content into a YouTube video. So you can keep watching, share with your team, share with your friends. We really want this word to keep spreading about attachment and to be an encouragement to each of you. Otherwise, we'll say goodbye for now, and then we'll end our time together. Be well, everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, friends. I think you have ending meeting power, Kelley, as the host.
Okay.
Whenever you're ready. Bye, everyone. Have a good night.
Good night.